Hello. Today I'm going to do a chapter review for the first couple of weeks of class, first 4 to 5 weeks, I believe, um, for class, and then I'll do the last couple of weeks in the next section. Um, so I just want to go over this with you so you will be prepared for your final exam that will open up tomorrow and then will close on May 5th. If you have any questions, you can always email me. All right, anything is possible. It seems impossible until it's done. So this, I'm not going to play the video, but this is just a quote really that I want to share just because I know things get a little challenging during this time of year for final exams and all your assignments that's due, but just know, remember we discussed prioritizing and planning um, and preparation, and you'll be able to get through it with proper planning. So for today, a review highlights, we'll discuss the SMART goals, steps, learning styles, define and provide examples of Bloom's taxonomy steps, active reading, memory techniques, and the SQ3R method and the steps. So we discussed that first week about SMART goals, as well as your assignment to complete your SMART goals. Well, we kind of broke it down, starting with the SMART goals, and then the action plan, and then breaking it down from there. And so remember, we discussed SMART goals is an acronym. Stands for specific, state what you'll do, state what you'll do um, regarding your goal, and so using those action words. Your goal is to improve, to decrease, those are action words. And then make sure it's measurable. Provide a way to evaluate it using metrics or data targets. So what are the metrics? How are you going to do it? So if it's regarding your GPA, your metrics will be looking at your grades, your assignments, grade assignments, and being able to gauge where you stand for each of your courses to know how close you are to reaching that goal. And then make sure it's achievable. Make sure it's within your scope. So you want to make sure that you're able to attain it, and that it definitely is relevant and that it applies. Here it says in your job function, but we're discussing within your education journey, and make sure it will improve not the business, but it will improve your process in some way. So it will improve your GPA. It will improve your academic standing. It will improve your methods for applying yourself to reach your goals. And then make sure it's time bound. State when you'll get it done. So have a deadline, and then time frame within that. What are the dates within that overall time frame? We always want to break it up so that it is measurable and attainable. So that involves setting different milestones for yourself. So that's the SMART goal. So make sure you remember the acronym and how it applies to goal setting. And we discussed the case scenario. Um, if the nursing student received a C in microbiology, he'll need to retake the course, improve the grade, to improve the grade to a B or better. How should he write his SMART goals? And so that was the activity you all did. We kind of discussed, and you all went into breakout rooms. So, a lot of you all mentioned, again, setting time aside to study, allocating a specific time for the course to study, keeping up with your reading, um, his reading, and knowing exactly what needs to be done along the way. And then learning styles. Remember, we discussed 4 types of Learners. There's visual, auditory, read-or-write, or kinesthetic. And many of you did the assessment to determine what kind of learner you were. And as I believe most of us, which is pretty common, we are more than one. Um, And so I think pretty much mostly everybody kind of was in line with what they thought they were. So visual learners prefer the use of images, maps, graphics, organizers to assess and understand new information. Auditory learners best understand new information through listening and speaking in situations such as a lecture or group discussion. And they use repetitive repetition in study techniques. And then study techniques such as using mnemonic devices. And then read or write, these are students that prefer learn best through words, writing it out. Um, they may present themselves as copious note takers or avid readers and are able to translate abstract concepts into words and essays. So writing it out makes sense. Remember, I discussed making lists. Um, and then, as we'll discuss too, how we take notes. Um, that also applies based on how you learn, whether you're an outliner, whether you like to use graphs or mapping systems. That all falls in line with the type of learner you are. And then kinesthetic, the students who understand information through tactile representation of information, hands-on, um, and they learn best through figuring things out by hands-on, um, putting things together. So again, that could depend on the situation, as I discussed in class, or just in general how you learn. If it's something more technical, you may learn by doing something hands-on. And so we went over this in class as well, which students likely to remember the most from his or her study session. Um, the auditory learner, looking at a PowerPoint, visual learner, watching a video, kinesthetic learner, rereading notes, visual learner, listening to vocabulary words on an MP3 player. So we discussed a visual learner, well, the answer is a visual learner watching a video because that is visual, okay? And then we discussed Bloom's taxonomy, levels of thinking. So the main thing you want to take, these are just action words and how we think. And the bottom half of the pyramid, the bottom three are the lower orders of thinking. The top three are the higher orders of thinking. So that's what you want to study. Know these bottom three as the lower order, the lots, and the top three are the hots. So we start with remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, then we evaluate and create, where we kind of bring it all together in a creative way based on everything that we've learned. And then we also discuss memory techniques, the three types of memory: working memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Working memory is what we use when we're actively performing the task. Um, so when we're doing something, we're remembering, like when we um, put our keys up as we're walking in the house. We're actively doing it because we know we put the keys up by the door. One, because it helps us know where it is, but it's something we do in the act. And the short-term memory is an aid that we employ to help us remember things on the short term. So that may be using those mnemonic devices, acronyms, whatever little strategies that you use to remember information, say until you take your exam. And then we have long-term memory. Excuse me, sorry about that. My allergies are on 10 today. Excuse me. Excuse me. So long-term memories are things you recall from the past. So the things we learn, like that you may learn now in one of your foundational courses for your major, you will recall on that when it comes time to your final, maybe doing your final assignment, your final capstone, when if you're completing your bachelor's and you're doing um, the capstone project for that, you use that information that you learned. Excuse me. Sorry about that. You use the information you learned initially in your first year of college. And now, whether it's 2 years later, 4 years later, 5 years later, that information is in your long term memory in time and ready for you to be able to apply it when it comes to either test taking, writing a paper, or a project, or applying it. Even when it comes after you've graduated, now you're in the workforce doing in your career, same thing. What you learned initially that first year, you're able to apply it in your career. So that's your long-term memory. Well, that's an example of the long-term memory. And then we discuss 3 steps we use when we remember ideas or images: encoding, storing, and retrieval. Encoding, again, that's that when we first perceive information through our senses. So again, that's like kind of like working memory, really, because as you're doing something, how it triggers you to process the information, it gets it well in the moment. That's our memory, and then it gets us sets it up so that we can begin to store it for our short-term memory. So when we need to use it again, and then storage is where we store it when we need to use it in the future. Um, And well, I guess that will be considered long term, but it can be long term or short term, but it's in the future. Um, and whether how far in the future, that just depends. But once we process it, we store it for future use. And then retrieval is where we retain that information and we go back to use it when we need it. So, like the example I stated, when you're in your career and now you're remembering some of the things you learned in your introductory course of your major, you're able to apply it now. And so this is the 3 techniques of memory and how our brain processes information in the different stages. And so the next thing we discussed was reading. We discussed active reading and how that is important for college courses, and um, how when we're doing our research and we're learning information, we're asking questions, we're seeking answers, and we're clarifying and clarifying any confusing element. So if you have questions, that's where you go and find the answers as your instructor, get a better clarity on that information, and then that way you're able to process it and then apply it later on when it comes time to taking a test or applying it in a paper or a project. So we want to plan to spend at least twice as long to read actively than to read passages without taking notes or otherwise marking select elements of the text. So we may go over the information, um, and we'll discuss that's where we talk about skimming, um, and then come back to actually read it in more thoroughly to actually understand it, and then eventually be able to apply it. So we read for 2 reasons: to introduce ourselves to new content and to more fully comprehend familiar content. So that's that skimming. When we're skimming, we kind of go over it to kind of get an understanding, and then when we start to actively read, we go in more detail and a deeper thought process to better understand it. So skimming versus active reading. And then again, bring in any prior knowledge about a topic to the reading session. We ask ourselves questions orally and in writing about the information you're reading, and that's part of that note-taking process, which we'll discuss in the next session. And then inferring and applying information from what you read. How are you interpreting? How are you able to apply it to what you already know, to concepts that you're learning? And then learning unfamiliar discipline-specific terms. Excuse me. Again, as you get more involved in your major, you'll start to read more in-depth information, maybe more dense, new terminology that you've never heard of. And so that's where your note taking comes in place again as well, because you want to take notes of things that you're not familiar with and go back and look that information up so you can better apply it. And then also apply it rephrase it to where you can understand it and then apply it in the situation. and then evaluating what you're reading, and then eventually apply that information to either your learning, which will be your assignments, test taking, projects, presentations, or life situations that you encounter. So that is the process of active reading. And so the SQ3R method and steps is the most prominent strategy we use for reading. So you definitely want to be able to break this down and know it. The active reading strategy. So it's a S, a Q, and three R's. So the S is survey. It's similar to skimming, where you're looking over the information for clues and meaning by reading the titles, headlines, introduction, summary, captions for graphics and keywords. So that's skimming. So you're kind of looking over it just to get the main idea of the content. And then question is your creation of questions to seek the main idea, support examples, and conclusions of the reading selection, turn headings into questions. And now the three R's. So after you skimmed it, you pose questions based on what you've read and the headings. Now you go in and read in more depth of the content so you can better understand it. And then try to find the answers to the questions that you establish, that you develop. And then recite means to speak it out loud. You're engaging other senses to remember the information. So your visual, your auditory, see what you say, and now you're committing it to memory. And then review is the recap. You're going back over the information that you read, add more notes if needed, and ensuring that you have captured the main points of the information. Um, Identified through supporting evidence, examples, and understood the overall meaning. So that's the SQ3R. You survey, you question, then the three R's: read, recite, and recall. Okay, so that's your active reading strategy. And so that's basically what we went over the first couple of weeks of class. So this is what you want to study now. You could kind of break it up, and then come. I'll post the next video tomorrow, and that will be the basically weeks 4 on. So chapters, what is it, 4, 5. Well, no, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think, and probably part of chapter 3 and chapter 11. So that'll be for next week. But I want to just break this up so that you can kind of break up how you're studying and make sure you have a full understanding of those first 4 weeks. And then we will discuss the next 3 weeks tomorrow. Okay. As usual, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Like I said, the final will open up tomorrow, and it will stay open through May 5th, noon, not midnight like all your other assignments. It will close at noon on May 5th. So try and get it done before May 5th. That way you don't risk missing the deadline date. All right. And then you have your career research project that is due as well, and that's due by May 3rd. And then you'll have your final discussion questions that's due the end of this week. Okay.